Hello, Portland Ovations fans. We have a very special evening of music for you with Bridget Kibbey and company for our next Chamber Series concert. Today, Brandi Parisi of All Classical Portland Radio will be interviewing Bridget, and we're very grateful to have her on board as our pre-performance lecturer. My name is George Lopez. I'm curator for the pre-performance lectures of Portland Ovations Chamber Series, as well as Beckwith Artists in Residence at Bowdoin College. And we're very excited to have just this extraordinarily creative and imaginative, not to mention world-class musician who plays the harp and is multi-awarded in so many ways, playing for Lincoln Center, playing for all the great halls and orchestras of the world. She's also an A.B. Fisher Career Grant recipient. Bridget Kibbey brings non-traditional music to a traditional context. So for those of you diehard chamber music fans, your world and horizons will be expanded with this very exciting and fresh look at the traditional chamber music concert series event. I highly recommend you come. Bridget is a very accomplished lecturer and speaker, always very lively and super interesting. So do come out to this wonderful event, and thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Brandi Parisi. I'm a host and producer with All Classical Portland, and I'm so excited to share with you a preview of an upcoming concert with harpist Bridget Kibbey. Bridget is one of the most innovative and dynamic artists working in the world today. She considers herself something of a modern minstrel, using her harp as a musical passport to excavate cultural narratives. Her past programs have included From Bach to Brazil, exploring 3 centuries of Latin dance, music from French masterworks of the Belle Epoque to Baroque counterpoint, and her newest program, Persia to Iberia, featuring the music and poetry and culture of the Islamic Golden Era, features Bridget, but along with friends, vocalist Masa Vadat and percussionist John Hadfield, creating a voyage through time and place and geography, from the Andalusian and Iberian Peninsula down through the African Maghreb and east toward ancient Persia. Bridget Kibbey, thanks so much for taking time to talk with us about this exciting program.
Thank you for having me today, Brandi. I'm so stoked to chat with you about it.
Now, I first learned about your work and this incredible work you do from the NPR's Little Desk concert back in 2020. You are such an exciting performer to hear and to watch. And I think maybe especially in the West, the common impression of the harp is maybe a little one-dimensional. It's a gentle, soft, even ethereal instrument. But in your hands, both as a player and as a curator, there are these incredible new dimensions. It's percussive and colorful and unexpected. I want to talk about the program, but before that, I'd really like to hear about you. What attracted you to the harp? And can you talk a little bit about your approach and your philosophy about your instrument?
Thank you, Brandi, for that amazing introduction and summation of kind of my mission on the harp, which is really to use it as a muse to explore time, place, people, groups, cultures, and all the things. And I find I've been playing, the harp for a long time. I first encountered it when I was 9 years old at a little country church in Northwestern Ohio, and had my wonderful Suzuki training and had very traditional training, which I'm so thankful for, at the Juilliard School with the great Nancy Allen, and went through all the international competitions and did all of that work. But in tandem with that, I found myself meeting my amazing international neighbors that lived and worked in New York City when I was 17 years old. And I just started to jump into the pool of improvisation and collaborations. And as I had that opportunity to do some of these kind of more world music projects or improvisational projects, it really helped me get outside the harp and view it as basically an open piece of wood with open strings, a hollow box with open strings. And I find that when I approach the instrument that way, and I'm willing to kind of be the hack in the room with incredible musicians from other places in the world, I really find that my perspective on my craft, my instrument in the world expands so much. And that's why I've kind of been drawn more recently to, alongside playing kind of the masterworks, the French masters of Debussy, Ravel, and a lot of the keyboard transcriptions I love to do. I'm finding myself gravitating to these projects that explore these cross-cultural pollination stories, because I get to kind of treat the harp like all these different beings, whether it be an oud or an organ or a guitar or a kora. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think the harp is just one of the most versatile instruments in existence. It really can take on a lot of different roles, flavors, colors, as soloist or continuo, to collaborator, to the bard and griot, that supports a great vocalist. So it just really offers me a lifetime of exploration.
I don't think anyone's calling you a hack, first off, but a box with strings. That is wonderful.
I think I was really blessed to have grown up in a family where my parents were consummate explorers. They'd throw us 3 kids in a family van, and we drive up to 8 hours overnight to get to a city to hear like a great jazz vibraphonist in Toronto. You know, I'm sitting there eating ice cream in a seedy underground club at 2 a.m. With my parents. We did, of course, go hear like the Chicago Symphony growing up in the Midwest, Cleveland Orchestra. But at the same time, I was really thrown in to hear these incredible jazz giants up close and personal. And then as I was in Juilliard and graduated, I was so thankful to have met composers that merge high art and folk art. That's my sweet spot when I commission as well. I love working with composers that understand the canon of classical music, but also are doing something in the folk sphere and marrying them, which is what this program will basically be. So I toured with Osvaldo Goliath and soprano Don Upshaw for a few years, in which I was kind of the only like classical musician in the room with these incredible jazz giants, folk musicians. And my role was to play a loosely written score, but mainly to improvise amongst these flavors of Andalusia, actually. And it kind of gave me this ethos at the harp, where I was, in a circle of wonderful musicians where we were allowed to try ideas and bat them back and forth. And so I found myself increasingly given those opportunities, and then now creating those opportunities alongside the incredible rich classical canon for the concert harp, which I always love playing and want to play. But I find this to be, I guess I'm a Gemini. I like having 2 sides. I like exploring these different kind of sides. Great music. I'm also really inspired by Brazilian guitarists. I love Yamandu Costa, the Assad brothers. I love American folk. I love the Punch Brothers, Chris Thiele. I can't get enough of pluck strings. So I listen to that repertoire more than anything else. And when you get that in your head, then you start to see your harp a little differently.
And in this program, I've seen that you've described how you're using the harp as all of these different instruments, as an oud, and as a different kind of instrument in different sorts of contexts. We're going to talk about the actual program, but can you talk a little bit about how your technique changes from instrument to instrument within the same instrument that you're playing?
Yes, I like you mentioned. I mean, the harp is so versatile in its core and its colors and its capabilities, and it really, to me, acts like a full orchestra. There are these associations that I bring into these collaborations. For example, working upcoming with Masa Vadat, the harp becomes a sort of oud mixed with guitar, but I'm not detuning the harp to match the interesting modal tuning that you would find in an Armenian or Iranian oud. And as a result, it kind of has a flamenco guitar element to it, which also matches Masa's current style and singing as this amazing Persian singer. So I think I'm playing within these certain modalities and scales and colors that have this wonderful paradox between sensual and fierce. And I find that marriage and the way I approach the harp playing is so special. You have these moments of incredible like rhythmic drive, and then you have this really beautiful, lush arpeggiations that create kind of a hazy color around that rhythm. And to me, that kind of has more of a flamenco association. at other parts of the program, the harp becomes like an African kora from Mali as we travel and talk about the Maghreb and North Africa and who was living in Morocco in 12th century that contributed to the Islamic Golden Era. And as a result, the harp kind of becomes this kora where the modes become this joyful pentatonic tones like you would hear on a kora. And a lot of the configurations entail a lot of trilling. There's a lot of really virtuosic kind of trills that kind of spill down the instrument that I wouldn't do in the more flamenco-esque part of the program. So there's these different kind of modes, affects, colors, and motifs that are played with that kind of create a layperson, which is what I am in these cultures, snapshot into these different cultures alongside these masters from those cultures, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, I've seen this described as almost a passageway beginning in Spain with the sounds and the instruments of Northern Africa and Central Asia meeting during the Islamic Golden Era. You've already started to talk about how your instrument and how you change your technique in playing, but can you talk a little bit about this is almost a cross-genre program, not just musically, but geographically and chronologically. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit the journey that you're taking here?
Yes, I think the central figure of the program is actually the Iberian Peninsula in 12th century Spain, which became during the Abbasid Caliphate of the Islamic Golden Era. It became the central highway where ideas, philosophy, musical instruments were meeting for the first time. So you had basically this incredible court in Cordoba, where you had a meeting of the ouds and minstrels that were coming from Central Asia, and then the sounds and the modes of Northern Africa traveling across that strait into the Iberian Peninsula, where you had these seats of power in the Islamic Golden Era. And as a result, you have schools of music, schools of philosophy, schools of astronomy, but their roots happen in ancient Persia. So what we're going to do throughout this program, we're going to start in 13th century Spain at the end of the Islamic Golden Era and listen to the sounds of Granada, Cordoba, Majorca. What would you have heard in that time? And how is, composer Albéniz, which we know is this wonderful pianist, composer, and guitar composer, he's looking back with this nostalgia at that time. How did he view it? We'll listen to music from that time period. Then we'll travel down to the African Maghreb, and I'll have a percussionist join me for that on the kalimba, which is an African thumb piano. And we'll perform some Gnawa traditional music, which is heard in Morocco and is still celebrated today, which is really representative of the African tribes that were brought against their will or of their own volition to Morocco in 12th century. And then we'll travel backwards in time to ancient Persia, and we'll invite Masa Vadat, who is a celebrated Iranian singer, on stage to kind of sing these incredible melodies that she's written on poetry of Rumi and Hafez. And we'll delve into the incredible literature and poetry of the Persian language that has really sustained their culture through generations.
Now, you've mentioned these guests that you'll be performing with, and I want to talk about how you met them and how this program kind of evolved with their work and with their input in just a moment. But I also wanted to ask how this program is going to play out on stage, because there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of music, but will you also be talking through the program itself?
I'm going to give a really short introduction, and it's a really fun, I'm scripting it and memorizing it because it's a lot of information to put into 3 minutes. So wish me luck. That's this next week's project. But basically, we'll talk about how we're going to go through 8 centuries of music and 5 musical traditions in an hour and a half. Okay. And we're going to spotlight that. But then I'm just going to play these Albéniz beautiful pieces written for the guitar that I've transcribed for the harp to showcase and just give everyone a little sound bath into the Iberian Peninsula and the sounds of 12th century Spain. Then I'll invite my percussionist, John Hadfield, on stage, and we'll talk a little bit about what makes something Gnawa tradition in music and Sephardic culture and who was living in Morocco, Spain. And then we'll talk about the interesting percussion instruments you'll encounter on stage. And then we'll perform this medley of that music together. Then I'll welcome Masa Vadan on stage and interview her quickly about her history, moving to the United States after the 1979 revolution. And she has an incredible story about being an emblem of women's rights and freedom, which is so prescient today. And she'll share a little bit about her personal story. And then we'll launch into a 30-minute set, unstoppable, of just her beautiful songs with John on percussion and myself completely improvising rhythm, modes, and sound colors to support her voice in these melodies for a 30-minute set of maybe 6 songs. So I'll talk a little bit, but basically the sounds will provide the migration pattern going backwards from 13th century Spain to 8th century Iran.
It sounds like an amazing program. I've been reading quite a bit about Masa in the last week or so, and her story. And, she's being talked about as a Persian folk singer almost, but also I've seen the word blues mentioned quite a bit in her singing and in her programs and what she's bringing. I know on this concert she'll be performing her own poetry set to music, along with the poetry of Rumi, as you mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about how you met her and also John, and how this program has evolved, but beginning with her and her work?
Well, it's so funny. I'm so glad you asked this, because an artistic director based in San Francisco set us up on the first date. So I was in San Francisco to play with a wonderful girls choir, and they've worked with Masa in the past, and Masa's based in Berkeley, California. So when I was there, this lovely artistic director said, you should get together and just meet in a room and see what happens. And so we actually got together and improvised. Her sister, Marjan, they often sing in duo, was also in town. And so on my YouTube channel, you can actually witness our very first improvisation together. I put my iPhone on a music stand, shot it through the strings, and you could see Masa, Marjan through the strings. And we improvised for a half hour, and we had an immediate chemistry. They were singing songs that they had written together, the two sisters, and I was just purely improvising to kind of create harmonic shifts and these waves of color around their voices. And we got along so beautifully. We didn't talk about what we wanted to do on stage or in that moment. We just made the music. And I think we still operate that way. There is some conversation in terms of roadmap of what we want to do in the music, but we trust each other and feel so wonderful with each other's natural musicianship that it is purely improvised, at least on my part and John's part, what we're going to hear on stage. And Masa has these incredible melodies that she's written. And I think the fact that we can trust one another to just go on stage and make every single performance new is what makes me just love working with her. And especially John, who is an incredible percussionist who's toured with Silk Road, every single every jazz musician in the world. He's all over the world. And he always has this incredibly sensitive affect to his percussion, his frame drum, his finger percussion that creates incredible colors without being overbearing in the sound. It's very chamber music-like, while adding incredible grooves and soul to the project.
One of the things that I've most enjoyed about watching your performances online is that interplay and the communicative aspect of chamber music, that it really feels like it's these small dances that are happening. You talked earlier about the harp being, percussive at one point, but then also pulling back and being gentle. And I love watching this. I imagine with a percussionist like this, we really see that, especially. How did you get to know John? You mentioned that he was part of the Silk Road. How did he become part of this project?
I love matchmaking musicians together, and I had a feeling he'd be a perfect fit for it. And so this is Masa and John's. We've collaborated a couple times before, but I put them together, which I love. I've worked with John for years in a lot of different contexts and have brought him into a lot of different projects, even one kind of delving into South American dances, cumbia, bachata, joropo, because I just trust his intuition so much. So we have a long history together of improvising together. I'm actually going to feature a couple of John's tracks as well. He writes for me in some incredible modes and styles. And so in that kind of Northern African part of the story, he's written a couple tracks that delve into like Middle Eastern Hijaz and North African modes that are super funky and groovy and high flying, test the hands, really fast flying action that allow us to improvise together over these really complicated mixed meters. And so he's really fun to work with, to challenge me in that regard. And so you'll get to hear him just be really virtuosic on his drums as well.
I'm so curious. I've mentioned that I wish more communities could hear these concerts. Is there any move or interest in possibly recording these at some point for access for more people?
Yes, I definitely love to record and document projects. I find I like to do the live events because we sense the energy in the room and we evolve and it gets better and better. And then at the end of that, it's really fun to record. So absolutely stay tuned. We're doing this project throughout the US a little bit the next couple of months, and then we will be getting into record some of these projects. So stay tuned. There's some snapshots up on my YouTube channel, but we definitely do intend to do I intend to feature these guys in some upcoming recording projects. So to be announced.
Very good. Well, in the meantime, also, you mentioned you do have a YouTube channel. Folks can go and see some of these performances as well. Where can they find that? Just Google you and find. Yeah. Okay. Bridget Kibbey and your YouTube channel. Very good. So we've been talking about Persian culture, the Persian language. There will be poetry in this program. Persian culture has sustained itself through centuries of conquests and caliphates, even up to today, and the political oppression that we know of today. Why do you think these works, or how do you think these works are so lasting through all of this?
I would respond to that in two ways. And the first is, when a culture is a high culture, it's emulated. We see this with the Romans emulating the Greeks in Hellenistic times. And I think throughout the Arabic conquest, a lot of ancient languages were eaten up by Arabic in that. But Farsi and the Persian culture and language sustained itself through that within the Islamic Golden Era because it was emulated. Their word for book was the word for book because they invented the book. Persians invented the actual leather-bound book, right? Which isn't surprising given their, ability to create this incredible literature. But they were emulated for their inventions and also the beauty of their language. So I would say that number one. I think it's just purely an emulation by multiple cultures within these fights for political domination where it was valued. The second thing is, the poetry of Rumi and Hafez is so poignant today. Hafez has this incredible poem that basically says, when the wine houses are closed due to overpiety, there's no love in the streets. This is what we're seeing today. We're seeing this oppression against freedom that's not allowing for there to be love in the streets. But he was saying this, I believe, in the 14th century. So these are very poignant, short poems that really speak to the human experience, whether it's romantic love or personal freedom or a community, tribe's freedom, that I think are completely relevant today. And that's why this incredible literature is just as poignant now as it was in the 13th century when Rumi was writing, or the 14th century when Hafez was writing.
Extraordinary. This sounds like an amazing concert, and I just want to again thank you so much for your time today and for talking us through what's going to be an amazing concert. Thank you so much, Bridget Kibbey, performing February 12th.
Thank you for having me.
That was harpist and modern minstrel Bridget Kibbey. She'll be joined by Iranian vocalist Masa Vadat and percussionist John Hadfield February 12th in Portland for her newest program, From Persia to Iberia, Exploring the Islamic Golden Age, made possible by Portland Ovations. I'm Brandi Parisi, and I'd like to leave you with a quote today from the Persian lyric poet Hafiz. Many say that life entered the human body by the help of music, but the truth is that life is music. Thanks for joining me.